Welcome. You're about to view a message on the Apostle Paul giving his final instructions in the last days of his life. It really comes down to what's important when you know you're at the end and who's important most of all. But the idea is not just a deathbed message. Wouldn't it be something to practice now before you get there, those things and those relationships that are important to you now and in the end? Again, thanks for joining us. Blessings. In verses 4, 6 through 8, the main thing, because we're going to go in 9 through 22 today. In 6 through 8, Paul says, I'm being poured out as a drink offering, and the time for my departure is close. You remember that. And he talked about that Jesus is spending my life. It is Jesus that is pouring me out, and it's his effort, and I'm just saying yes to Jesus. Wouldn't it be nice if Christianity is just saying yes to Jesus? And it's not a lot of work, just responding to what he's doing in your life. And so then he says, my life's being poured out. I've fought a good fight. I've finished my course. I've kept the faith. I said those are the 3 F's to remember. That you're fighting a fight for Jesus. I fought a good fight. I have finished the course. You know, you need to finish. Finishing well is really important. And I have kept the faith. What do you do when you come down to the end of life? You've had your mission. You've had your ministry. You've been engaged. You've been poured out. You have been beaten, shipwrecked, put on trial, been in prison. It feels like half your ministry. And now you come down and you're still in prison, and he's in the Mamertine prison, the worst prison in Rome, and he's in the dungeon of the Mamertine prison. And now he's given the big charge, the big message, and now he's coming down to final things. Well, Paul is certainly in some kind of a quarantine when he's in prison. And he's alone, and you can sense what he feels. And so I want to look at several things, but I'm going to challenge you this morning to think, when you're down, Joy and I put it like this, when you're down to your last days, you know how we always talk about downsizing as we get older? Well, work on that, Pat. Okay, so at any rate, so we talk about downsizing, and you know, we've downsized. We've now got things. We used to have a pole barn and all this stuff, or a large garage. And an extra shed and another shed, and now we're down to very little by comparison, but we still say, what happens when life comes down to a 9 by 12 room? Now, God willing, you'll never go to a facility. If you don't have to, and you can die in your home and say goodnight and go to sleep and be with Jesus. Don't we all long for that? But should it not come to that, I've seen many, many people. My number one favorite ministry was nursing homes and then prisons, and I'm not sure about the order. But the nursing homes are one of my favorite, and I've seen a lot of people that's home. It's not like a hospital where it's temporary. And it's interesting what happens. And I'll try not to be too emotional, but everything they have that's meaningful is placed in that 9 by 12 area. And that's what they have. And sometimes they're even sharing a room. And it's like, so what happens when you get down to life at the end? What are going to be the things that are important? And I'm going to tell you this. For the most part, they won't be things. And so I'm going to show you from Paul the thoughts of a man who knows he's dying in a few hours, days. I don't know if it was weeks or not. But here's what happens. Personal relationships. I'm going to talk about 3 kinds of personal relationships. Loving relationships, lost relationships, and lasting relationships. And that's only the beginning of the message today. Okay, but we'll go rather quickly through these. Paul says in verse 9, you ready? And I'm going to read the whole passage here. Make every effort to come to me soon, because Demas has deserted me, since he loved this present world, and he's gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Bring Mark with you, for he is useful to me in the ministry. I have sent Tychicus to Ephesus. And then we'll stop there. Verse 12. Okay. So the first thing that he is saying is loving relationships. Timothy is like a son to him. He's his son in the gospel. Remember, I gave you all those scriptures. Paul was a mentor and Timothy was like a son. And so he says, make every effort to come to me soon. Paul wants someone close that he loves. And Timothy he loves as much as anyone ever. And so he uses some strong Greek language. He uses this spadazo. You can say, what's that? Spadazo, speed. And then he uses, the Greek sometimes. He uses takios. Excuse me, it's really takios, it's an omega. But tachometers. Here is what he's saying. He's doubling down on this, man. He's saying, I want you to get here fast and rev it up, baby. Yeah. See, he's saying, I want you to get here and rev it up. I mean, he is really urgent. And by the way, he'll repeat this. And so here's what he says. Double emphasis. Timothy, I want you now. There's not much time. And even if I knew there was, I need you now. So here. And let me just tell you this. Attend to loving relationships, okay? I'm trying to think of this. When you go through these passages, try to imagine yourself on both ends. You're Paul, but you're Timothy. I do that. I put myself in each character in the scripture so that I know what to avoid and whatever. And I'm just going to say this for my first illustration. There is a song which you should know. You've probably heard it. But when someone has a need, a loving relationship, a loving person, attend to those. Here's what he says. Here's what the song goes, wrote by Harry Chapin. My child arrived just the other day. He came in the world in the usual way, but there were planes to catch and bills to pay. He learned to walk while I was away, and he was talking before I knew it, and as he grew, he'd say, I'm going to be like you, Dad. You know I'm going to be like you. And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon. Little boy blue and the man in the moon. When you coming home, Dad? I don't know when. But we'll get together then. You know, we'll have a good time then. My son turned 10 just the other day. He said, thanks for the ball, Dad. Come on, let's play. Can you teach me to throw? I said, not today. I got a lot to do. He said, that's okay. And he walked away, but his smile never dimmed. It said, I'm going to be like him. Yeah, you know, I'm going to be like him. And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man in the moon. When you coming home, Dad? I don't know when. But we'll get together then. You know, we'll have a good time then. Well, he came home from college just the other day, so much like a man, I just had to say, son, I'm proud of you. Can you sit for a while? He shook his head and he said with a smile, what I'd really like, Dad, is to borrow the car keys. See you later. Can I have them, please? And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man in the moon. When you coming home, son? I don't know when. But we'll get together then, Dad. You know we'll have a good time then. I've long since retired and my son's moved away. I called him up just the other day. I said, I'd like to see you if you don't mind. He said, I'd love to, Dad, if I could find the time. You see, my new job's a hassle and the kids have the flu. But it's sure nice talking to you, Dad. It's been sure nice talking to you. And as I hung up the phone, it occurred to me he'd grown up. just like me. My boy was just like me. And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon. Little boy blue and the man in the moon. When you coming home, son? I don't know when, but we'll get together then, Dad. We're going to have a good time then. Man, if that doesn't hit your heart, you better, well, take your pulse. One of the things my brother Bob and I have talked about, and Mark and I have shared this, we're amazed at how much we talked to our dad, and yet at times how little we knew. Because when you're young and you're busy, you don't think about a lot of things you'd want to ask. And when he's gone and there's no records, and you go, well, what about this and what about... And we find out there's so much we don't know. And probably because it's just, we'll get to that later on, or we're busy, or whatever it is. So it really strikes me to practice now in those loving relationships. I realize you can't attend everybody. Even Jesus couldn't. There were many that were not impacted by him. But those loving relationships, like he had that inner circle and those 12, and whatever your relationships are, attend to them. And let me give you a more personal illustration than the cat and the fiddle. Let me just tell you this. It was just last year, I believe, that we were called. Joy's dad was a very somewhat mellow, but a very reserved. He would talk when we're there, but nothing was rushed or important. And in terms of, pressure, very relaxed. And last year he was hospitalized a number of times, but out fairly quick. But he would never let on that he was ill. We didn't know. He would not tell us. He went to the hospital. We never knew he was in the hospital. But it did come up that he went in, and after all kinds of tests, he had cancer, and they said it was serious. But I could not believe the difference when we talked to him. We speedily went out of here. We told you folks, we had to go, but his tone of voice and his demeanor totally changed. We called even on the way. We called and said, we're coming, and he'd go, when? When are you leaving? And you could he knew he was going to die. He's got one child. And you could sense in his voice. And we're on the way driving. And we can only go so fast. And we'd call him, and we'd call and talk. So you're on your way? When do you think you'll be? About what time will you be here? I mean, it's like we drove straight through, never stopped, to Arkansas, whatever. So at any rate, I said, I have never felt this, and he wanted us there now. He did not want to die outside of family. You understand that, don't you? Yep. We couldn't have delayed 2 or 3 days because he didn't last. They told him he had weeks. Thank God that we were able to get there. Loving relationships come now. Now, there's also in life, there's lost relationships. Paul in verse 10 says, because Demas has deserted me, since he loved this present world and has gone to Thessalonica. Let me mention, Demas is his fellow worker in a previous chapter. Demas, my partner. There's 3 mentions of Demas. One is Demas, and then Demas, my fellow worker, and then Demas has forsaken me, deserted me, having loved this present world. It's pretty obvious what to say about that. In life, there are losses. There's no doubt. Lost relationships. I had people say, I'll stand by you forever, and forever lasted a couple of months. You know how that goes. And yet they were on Paul's mind. partly because there had been something there. There had been a closeness there. Now, the sad part for me is this, folks. I'm gonna ask you to play Demas just for a moment. That sometimes the love of this world is stronger than the love of people. I'm telling you, it is. It gets to a place where the attractions of this world and the toys of this world and the things of this world take precedence. And Demas, listen, it wasn't like Demas performed this great big sin. You know what happened? His love shifted. That's all. Remember when Jesus said, I just have one thing against you. You're a good-looking church, man. You're doing all the right things. You gave 20% more. Your missions are up. But you have left your first, and it's really not first, best love. Jesus said that. You've left your best love. And that is a slippery slope down. And so, make sure that your love for God and His people does not get distracted by the pressures of this world and the attractions. Now, the last thing, there are lasting relationships that Paul has, and he talks about it. He says in verse 11, Luke is with me, bring Mark with you, for he is useful to me in the ministry. Now, I like this one, and I'll tell you why. There are people that you don't see much at all. You don't see them. But I can tell you, and you think of this in your head, if you saw them tomorrow, it would be like they lived next door. It isn't like there's a lot of contact, but it's a lasting relationship. I have a number of those, but I'll give you an example. I have a friend, he was another PK. That's a swear word for preacher's kid. No, slang. He was a PK, and we were in the same town, and his daddy was the pastor of the Free Church, and mine was the Nazarene. And Larry and I both went off to Vietnam. Larry had a much harder time, but he's fine. He got a Purple Heart, was injured in Vietnam. And but we were buddies, and we got together often after we graduated, ran around a little bit together, and we were in each other's homes a lot. We don't hardly ever see each other, and there's not phone calls much. But when I do see Larry, at his 50th wedding anniversary, when I do see Larry, it's like we've never missed a beat. It's just, well, there's my best friend. And it's like people look at us and they go, you guys, and when we see each other, he got tears in his eyes last time. I can't believe you're here, but it was still like, this is kind of like Mark. Paul actually had a split up of a partnership because of Mark. Paul and Barnabas were traveling together, and Mark deserted them at one point. That's what Paul felt. Barnabas didn't feel that way. They had an argument, and Barnabas said, I want to bring Mark with us. And Paul said, I don't want him with, because I'm afraid he'll take off on us as he did once before. So Paul was a little hard there. It became such a big argument, not this hateful thing, but it became so strong that Barnabas took off with Mark and they formed a team, and Paul started his own with Silas. That's how Paul and Silas got going. But here's the thing. It is so interesting to me that in the end, Paul says, oh, by the way, Timothy, bring Mark. Because there wasn't anything lost in the relationship. There was a disagreement. Can I just say, wouldn't it be nice to have the skill of being able to disagree without losing relationship? Wouldn't that be nice if people could hear another opinion other than mine or yours? Before you laugh too hard, wouldn't it be nice if with different opinions you wouldn't necessarily lose? I have friends like that. I have friends in different denominations. Our doctrine's not identical. I'm not totally comfortable maybe in their church, but I have no doubt that we're brothers and sisters in Christ, and there's a relationship there, even though we know we have disagreements theologically or doctrinally. But you know, John Wesley and George Whitefield, two great preachers, George Whitefield mainly in America, they had big differences. And you know why? Because one was a Nazarene and one was a Baptist. No offense, just kidding. Just kidding. It's a joke, really is. Actually, that's true. John Wesley, being Methodist, was coming from a different place than Whitefield, who followed John Calvin. So they had a different view of some things. And people tried to come between them and split them up and say, you know, one of them even said to George Whitefield, do you think John Wesley's even going to make heaven? Because these guys would write letters back and forth, kind of arguing doctrine, but in a loving way. In other words, isn't it good to have a conversation? If ever we're in a place where this country needs to know how to have a conversation without hatred, we need to have a conversation. And you know what it takes to have a conversation? It takes listening. I said that last week. We need to hear other sides. We don't have to agree or even like it, but we need a conversation. Because if somebody's not listened to, I'll never get them to listen to me about Jesus. Now, it's hard sometimes, I'm going to tell you. But George and John, they didn't have that problem. They disagreed, and I loved reading the letters. I used to have a book of their letters, and they were stinging, man. But they loved each other. Learn how to love someone that's in disagreement with you. And one person walked up to George Whitefield and says, I think John Wesley is so off in his teaching that I don't even know if you'll see him in heaven, George. And I love what George Whitefield said. He said, you know, you might be right, because I know John, and I think he might be so close to the Father that I might not get to see him. What a humble attitude. What a humble attitude. We want to be that way, because I'm going to tell you what we need right now. What's going on here is Paul is saying, I've lost some relationships, but only Luke is with me. But Timothy, you come and bring Mark, and because listen, we need everybody we can get in this world. I want everybody I can have around me that loves God. So, the lasting relationships. I'll tell you one of the most interesting ones to me. I got contacted one time. This happens a lot over the years. People that I've lost touch with forever. We never even tried to stay in touch. I had a person contact me through Facebook and responded to something I'd written and said, her name is Sherry Padilla. I can say it. Maybe I shouldn't when we're going on YouTube. Sherry Padilla. But nevertheless, Sherry said, do you remember me? And I said, I don't know. Where are you from? And it was Pueblo, Colorado. Well, my sisters and I had traveled singing in a lot of places, and Pueblo, Colorado, twice we were in for revivals and a concert one evening and so on. And so I said, Sherry from Pueblo Nazarene? And suddenly it came, and she said, yes. And I said, wow, thanks for contacting me. She said, I remember you and your sisters. Now here's what this, and there's a point to this. I'm not just going to keep you up all night telling stories to you, so stay awake. Cheryl laughs. Okay, so Sherry said, what's your address? I want to send you something. I said, oh, okay, I'll give you my address. And we still stay in touch today. Now, bear in mind, this is a minimum of 60 years ago since we've had any contact. I was 14. Well, so maybe it's 59 years ago. Not quite 74. So, in the mail came a poster with my picture and my sister's on it, a newspaper clipping, a revival services thing, and a record we had made. And she said, put a note in there, I've kept these all these years. I'll never forget. I want to say something. You don't know,
That's right.
good or bad, you don't know the impact that your life can have on someone. I couldn't even remember her, and she kept a record of that revival. Again, would you put yourself in both places for a moment? Mine and hers. Is there someone that's impacted your life in such a way that you might encourage in the weeks ahead, that you might say, you know, way back, I just wonder, that's why I said it's kind of a different message. It's just a reflection to think about relationships, because that's what really would matter when we come to that 9 by 12, and frankly, even if you're in a big house, what will matter? From her side, she was impacted and she remembered and shared it. From my side, to be alert and say, wow, how many others might I impact? And friends, let me tell you, I have impacted people not in a good way too. I understand that. It's not condemnation. But we don't look back at where we failed. We look at what we are and where we go now. Who can I impact for Jesus? I've done enough the other way. Who can I impact for Jesus? It's a good thing. So, loving relationships, lost relationships, and those lasting relationships. I can give you an example of one of those. For me, another one. And it was a former district superintendent for the Nazarene Church, back when it was just the Minnesota district. And his name was Norman Bloom. And it was way back. Norman Bloom was one of the most gentle, godliest men I ever met. And he knew me in some of my worst years. He knew when I was backslidden away from the Lord, and he was my dad's DS. And he had those eyes of Christ. He would look at you, and you melted. And Norman Bloom, when he would see me, and it wasn't often because I tried to avoid him. You know how it is. You're feeling guilty. So if I was, and Dad would say, Norman Bloom's coming by, he wants to see you. Oh no, help me, Jesus. I loved him, but I knew where I was at. But you know what Norman Bloom did? Put his arm on me. And, how are you? Good, good. That's wonderful. Never said a word. I'm praying for you. Norman Bloom is the one that put me into the ministry, that encouraged me to go to college after I came back to Jesus. I got to see him just a couple years ago. He's now passed away. And you can pray for his family. We kept in touch. I saw him once in a while. My sister kept in touch constantly. But I'm on the other end. He's one of those people I never forgot. He impacted my life, and he still does. I want to find more people like that and thank them. I want to practice before I get to the 9 by 12 route. Hey, you can smile. It's a fun message. It really is. It really is. I mean, I know you're a little convicted, but it is a fun message. It's a message of gratefulness. Paul is grateful. And he loves relationships. And I'm telling you, be a grateful people of those who have shared Christ with you, and those that have lasted, and those that you love, and then those that need you to come, whatever the circumstance is. There's a kind of a neat little thing where he interjects here, and he says, he goes to his personal effects. Because after he talks about that, he says, oh, when you come, verse 13, bring the cloak I left in Troas with Carpus, as well as the scrolls and especially the parchments. And I'm going to just really do this quickly. It's important. But he says, bring the scrolls. These are writings. Could be some scripture. It's not, they all didn't have Bibles in, but could be some writings. And they're books. And the parchments are like what he would write on. Membranes from animal stretch, parchment. And so he said, oh, bring my coat. Number one, it's going to get cold. Winter is coming. And we'll see that in the passage. Winter is coming. And he's in a dungeon, guys, underground, in a hole. And it's going to be cold. There's no heat. And winter's coming, and he's asking for his coat. And then he's asking for, I want my Bible, and I want to be able to write letters. And that's why we have this letter. Aren't you glad? Now, I could say a lot here, but I'll say very little. Where I get to really thinking is this. Letters. We don't have letters anymore, hardly. Very few letters that we write, because we have email and texts and things like that. And I read letters from my dad. Everything is handwritten out. Now, again, we have something that is better than what I had in those days, in a way, if it's video, because we say, well, we used to talk to each other on the phone. Well, we still do. We got phones all over the place. And we even have video phone. We have messenger video, and we have Zoom. And so if we use them, that's wonderful that you can see somebody's face. I wish I could have done that when I was in school and saw my dad. But the fact is, the personal notes are kind of diminished. And I have the record from my dad writing letters. So Paul says, do that. And it reminded me that when I've been in nursing homes, and I've been with a lot of people that either died or were getting ready to die, and that's why this chapter hits me so much. Often the requests, it's like, could you tell them to bring that blanket? And they would describe that blanket I have at home. I'm a little cold. Or would you pull that blanket up? Oh, my daughter made this blanket. You see that? Isn't that pretty? And I'm going to tell you the kinds of things that I see in those 9 by 12 areas. That are really meaningful. Flowers, it's not because of the flowers, it's because of who they came from. Flowers are nice, but they are attached to a face. Cards, I can't tell you how many times I've been asked to read the cards. It's wonderful. I love doing it. Oh, those cards over there, go ahead and read them from my family. Aren't they beautiful? Pictures. These are my children. Do you know what? I've never had anybody show me a picture of a four-wheeler. Never, when they're dying. I've never had them show me a picture of even like jewelry. It is not stuff that's important in the final days. I've never had anyone say to me while they were passing on, Sam, could you go grab a picture of my house? I mean, that would make sense to me. That's okay. They want to see where they live. No, it is like, it's all about relationships in the end. And the stuff is about relationships. Joy and I often talk, because we went through a house fire in 1988 and lost virtually everything, almost everything. House burned to the ground, but we lost almost everything. And we've talked about what would we keep if we had to get down to a room. I mean, seriously. No, just think about it for a bit. To a room. I want to think about that myself. Because when you go through your house, you go, well, I could give this to the Salvation Army, I could give this, oh, well, I'll keep, whatever. And yeah, but I've had this for years, and I really need help. We just can't get rid of that. Why, it was given to us by a what's their name? It's like, I don't know. It's like, I might need that someday, Mark. I might need that someday. You never know.
Yes. And I'll have it for you.
Thank you. Just in case. Well, let's get down to that's the personal effects, but I really am saying, Jesus, it isn't that I may have to get down to that, and it wouldn't be a bad idea, but would you help me to pick my treasures now? Paul didn't have anything. No pictures. Okay, finally, personal concerns. He says, and this is good, in his final hours, he says, by the way, I want you to watch out. You're going to have opposition in life. Alexander the coppersmith did great harm to me. The Lord will repay him according. Watch out for him because he strongly opposed our words. And so he said, be careful, Timothy. In life, there's going to be people that are really going to come against you. I just want you to be on alert. Do you know, I've seen people do that in different ways. They're talking to their kids in the end. They're concerned about a certain, you do it when you're alive, but think down at the end. Hey, pick your friends carefully. Don't let the world distract you. Hey, stay out of this. Stay out of that. Because it's going to really harm you. It can really harm you. See, young people don't get that. We don't get that when we're young, the impact of that message, because it feels like nothing can harm us. And when we're told, hey, please stay in fellowship with people that believe, or watch your friends, and we go, oh, come on, you never did like my friends. And that was true. I never did. But nevertheless, no. Paul is saying there are people that are out to hurt you. Just be alert. They really do oppose you, and they may not look like it. And then he goes on to say, and I love this part in verse 16, he says, at my first defense, because he says, I have these personal concerns about opposition, but then he goes on, at my first defense, no one stood by me, but everyone deserted me. Listen to that. No one stood by me, but everyone deserted me. There's some very big Greek words that everyone deserted me, and it's they did not appear. It's like there's a courtroom. I was in a trial, my first defense. He really was in a trial, and he said, I looked around and there wasn't one person, not even in the gallery. They just didn't appear. The word has 3 words in it. It's like no one appeared alongside of me at all. None alongside did not appear. But he's not bringing it up for bitterness. So there will be things, there will be times you go it alone. And we're going to get to the most fun part as we finish here now. He's not bringing it up because he's bitter. He says, may it not be counted against them. Doesn't that sound like Jesus? Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And Stephen, don't charge him with this. He's saying they weren't there, but God, don't hold it against them. So there's not bitterness. So if you've got people that have deserted you, or people that have hurt you and have gone out of your life, and we all have some, but boy, if you've lost relationships or broken marriage or whatever, I mean, even in junior high, some of that starts where people walk away, I don't want to be your friend. But if you've got people that have walked away and hurt you, I want to tell you, here's the best prayer you can do. May it not be held against them. I don't care who it is. I don't care how much they've hated you. They hated Stephen enough to stone him. They hated Jesus enough to crucify him. They're going to behead Paul. And here is the mark of a great, great servant's heart. Oh God, I don't want judgment on them. I don't want. See, most of the time, it's like they're going to get theirs. You know, we get into we think is a good place and we go, well, I don't have to retaliate, but God will get them. And there's some people just wishing that God will get that person. Now, there's a difference in saying they can deal with the Lord. Paul says that about Alexander, but this is important. May it not be held against him. I want you to pick your worst opposition, those that have deserted you, and try to pray the prayer. Those that have not just deserted you, those that have hurt you, and say, may it not be held against them. It's such a peaceful way to live, and therefore a peaceful way to die. So here's Paul's big ending, really. He says, everyone disappeared. Verse 17, this would be the key verse. But, one of my favorite words, no one's there. Where's all my friends? No one's there. Where are they? I'm on trial here. Is there anybody going to testify for me? No. But the Lord. Read this. This is where I jump up and down. You can't see it, but I am. But the Lord stood with me and strengthened me. And he strengthened me, which is a really reinforced word for dynamite. I stood there on trial and there was nobody around. But suddenly the Lord was right there. The best lawyer, the best witness that I could ever have. He was right there with me. And he strengthened, the word is dynamite, so that I could still keep preaching Christ. And listen to what he says. I was rescued from the lion's mouth, which probably means both Colosseum and the enemy. But he says, the Lord will rescue me from every evil work and will bring me safely into his heavenly kingdom. To him be the glory. So listen to this. This is important for us to grasp. The Lord will rescue me. And he ends up saying, He will rescue me, verse 18, from every evil work and will bring me safely into the kingdom. To him be glory forever. Paul, you just said you know you're going to die in this prison. You've been in prison, you've been beaten, you've been flogged. What do you mean the Lord will rescue you from every evil work? You're going to have your head cut off. That sounds evil to me. Not to Paul. The Lord will rescue. The only evil work that's critical is for the enemy to take you. For the enemy to pull you away from Christ. That's Paul's saying, it's not my body I'm worried about. Jesus has rescued me from every evil work, which is whatever the enemy would try to do to get me to turn away. And then he says this. He will bring me safely into the heavenly kingdom. He is going to literally escort me into the kingdom. So let me close with this. When it comes down to that final time, relationships. So practice now. I could ask you two questions. Who do you need to go to before winter? 21, Paul says this, make every effort to come before winter. It's the exact same grammar as verse 9 when he starts. Make every effort to come. Double down, speed. I want that tachometer really winding out, man. Get here. Come before winter. Paul is talking about a season, but I'm talking about a season of life. Just two questions. Who do you need to get to before winter? The other one is, when all else is gone, when all things are gone, and you're alone, who are you going to trust? Who are you going to trust? What are you going to have at that point?